to review a little bit what goes on in the nephron, here we have our glomerulus, and that's surrounded by a Bowman's capsule. And the glomerulus is where blood comes in through the afferent arteriole and leaves through the efferent arteriole. But the blood that comes in brings a lot of pressure into this ball of capillaries called the glomerulus, and a lot of stuff shoots out of the capillaries because they have holes in them. They have little filtration slits, essentially. And what goes through there is anything that's small enough to fit through the holes. And that's water, not all of the water, but a lot of the water, plus solutes like sodium and calcium, and also things like glucose and maybe amino acids, but nothing so big as a protein or a cell. But size, again, isn't always the best characteristic to decide whether we want to get rid of this molecule with our urine, piss it away, if you will, or whether we want to keep it. And so some small things, like urea, we do want to get rid of, but some we want to keep. So we have these tubules, the proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, and distal convoluted tubule. These are surrounded by capillaries so we can have exchange and move things back and forth. And this is not anatomically correct, right? These tubules would be all over the place. This is just spreading it out so you can see it effectively. And in the proximal convoluted tubules, we're going to pump back a lot of things. Sodium, chloride, we're going to pump back glucose, things like that. And because those are solutes and water follows solutes via osmosis, water comes back too. So we pump back a lot of nutrients and a lot of water. Then, in your nephron loop, it dips down from your cortex into your medulla. So this is your cortex up here. This is your medulla down here. And as you get down into the medulla, down here, it gets saltier and saltier in this interstitial fluid. And so as this tubule comes down, water is going to start leaving via diffusion. So this is another way that we reabsorb a lot of water. You have something like 90 or 100 liters of water go through your kidneys every day that become filtrate. You can't urinate that much. You would be so dehydrated. The vast majority of that we have to reabsorb. So we send our tubule down into this salty medulla. Water comes back. And then this stuff gets much more concentrated because it's lost its water. It's mostly solutes. So on the way up, you would expect water then to come back in because this is really salty, and as you get up, this becomes less salty. But it doesn't happen because we change this wall. We make this the wall of this tubule thicker and less permeable to water. So water can't come back in, even if it would via osmosis, because it's not permeable anymore. And then we actively pump sodium out so that it's not so salty anymore. We reabsorb some sodium, and that keeps this medulla salty so that the next filtrate that comes down still loses a lot of its water back to the body via just straight osmosis. So we pump sodium out. That costs ATP, but it means that this water reabsorption is free. Doesn't cost any ATP. It's just passive osmosis. Then in the distal convoluted tubules, we'll do some more reabsorption. We also may do something called secretion. And in secretion, we take something that was too big to get into the filtrate from the blood, right? But it's something we want to get rid of. So it might be something toxic, like a drug, right? It could be acetaminophen or something like that. It's a big molecule. It's in large concentrations toxic to your body. You want to get rid of it. So you will, using ATP, actively pump it from your blood into the distal convoluted tubule. And then, at this point, we're almost urine, right? The filtrate, which is what we've been calling the fluid in these tubules so far, is not quite, but almost urine. Now we dump into a collecting duct. And your collecting duct takes filtrate from a bunch of nephrons, right? You can see all these distal convoluted tubule ends dumping into a single collecting duct. Then your collecting duct comes back down through the medulla, which, as we said, is really, really salty. And so water can then be moved out via just osmosis, right? And sometimes urea, too. If we have excess urea, we can allow it to move out via diffusion. Now, the water in the proximal convoluted tubule and the nephron loop, we're always going to reabsorb that water no matter what, because we always have to reabsorb most of the water in our kidneys. But we don't always have to reabsorb all of it, right? Depends on how much water we've been drinking. It depends on how much we've been sweating, for instance. And so when we're dehydrated, we want to reabsorb more. And so we make the walls of this collecting duct more permeable to water, so that more of this water will diffuse back into this medulla here, and our blood can pick it up. We make them more permeable via a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. An antidiuretic hormone causes these cells that line this tubule to produce proteins called aquaporins, which are literally water pore proteins, and they let water come through. If you're not dehydrated, you're not producing antidiuretic hormone. And instead, you don't produce so many aquaporins, and this collecting duct is no longer permeable to water, or at least quite as permeable to water. So you don't, even though you're moving down into this salty medulla, you don't reabsorb nearly as much water. And in that case, you're going to get rid of more of the water with your urine. So you're going to have more urine. It's going to be more dilute because there's more water in it. When you produce antidiuretic hormone, you reabsorb more of that water. So you have less urine. The urine that you do have has less water in it, so it's more concentrated. Instead of being clear, it's yellowy, orangier. So again, if you're dehydrated, or if you just woke up in the morning and you haven't had a drink all night, you're going to have been secreting ADH, and that's what your urine's going to look like. And here's a specific look at the osmolarity of your filtrate as it moves down. Right, it's going to become more concentrated as you move down to the medulla because you've lost a bunch of water. And then as it comes up, it's going to become less concentrated because you're pumping sodium out. And it becomes less concentrated up here. Then we reabsorb some more water and it becomes more concentrated down here. Now, that's a broad look at how vertebrates do it. We kind of focused on mammals there, but it's a little bit different in different vertebrates. Freshwater fishes, which are hyper osmotic to their environment, so water tends to move in, are going to secrete large volumes of dilute urine, and they're going to conserve salt in their distal tubules because they need to hold on to salt and get rid of water. It's different if you are a marine fish or a terrestrial amphibian. Amphibians have to conserve water on land, so they reabsorb a lot of water from the urinary bladder back into their bodies. Marine fish are hypoosmotic compared to their environment, and so they are not going to produce nearly as much urine, nearly as much pee to get rid of as their freshwater counterparts. And again, we can regulate how much water we reabsorb or don't reabsorb to a pretty large degree with antidiuretic hormone. Again, if we're dehydrated, we secrete a lot of antidiuretic hormone, causes us to reabsorb a lot more water, especially in the collecting duct. If you drink something that's a diuretic, like coffee or alcohol, it interferes with the action of antidiuretic hormone. So even if you're dehydrated, you don't conserve that water and you pee a lot, right? Anyone who drinks coffee or alcohol is probably familiar with that. But then you get dehydrated, and so if all you drink is coffee during the day and let's say booze all night, the next morning you're going to find that you're very dehydrated, and you're probably going to have a very piercing headache and a dry mouth and lots of other symptoms that go along with that.